Hi guys! Today we'll be recapping a story called The Runaway Lead Lives Next Door. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot. Enjoy! A resounding thud shatters the bright morning air. Seina Rohill, a D-class hunter, revels in her victory over the dragon. But her triumph is short-lived as she slips, jolting awake to the realization that it was all just a dream inspired by a novel she had read. What a thrilling dream she has! But then her dream becomes reality as Seina wakes up in a hospital bed realizing that she's been reincarnated as a novel character. She's now living as a hunter, just like what she was dreaming in her office. Surprisingly, despite her being confused, she mentions a phrase that creates a commotion between the doctors. She's presumed to be someone who is losing her mind. Seina, in full conviction, tries to convince the doctor that she's perfectly fine. Afterwards, she successfully discharges herself in the hospital but ends up being broke. Seina wonders what must be her role in the story. The realization hits her about being impossible to be the main character because she remembers how she failed to use the status screen she mentioned in the hospital. Then a side character, perhaps? As Seina strolls through the village streets, her mind whirled through thoughts of her place in the story unfolding around her. Lost in contemplation, she suddenly recalled the name of the main character, Ellen. Moments later, she spotted Ellen, the protagonist. The realization that the lead lived right next door struck Seina like a bolt from the blue, leaving her feeling strangely insignificant in the novel. Months after, Seina learns to get used to being an extra. She knows that the original novel is centered about finding the main lead, so Ellen will only get one confession a day until she will find the one. After Ellen's rejection of one suitor, Seina is taken aback by the unexpected arrival of another man, whose presence defies the rules of one confession per day. His aura set him apart, signaling that he is no ordinary character, nor an extra of the novel. Dion, the man who asks Ellen's hand for marriage like everyone else, is also rejected for the fact that they've only known each other for a month. However, he continues to push through his feelings. Meanwhile, Seina considers the scene in front of her cliché. She was wrong to believe that Dion can make Ellen say yes. What Seina sees is a complete cycle that she already read in the book. I find it amusing how Seina assigns ratings to every man who confesses. It's absolutely hilarious. A perfect score of 10 out of 10. After the scene, she stands up and heads her way to her house. However, her path is abruptly halted when she spies another figure. His shoulders slumped in defeat, his face a mask of heartbreak right outside her doorstep. Strangely, Dion is the only man that stays longer in that kind of state. Despite Seina giving him time to grieve, the rain even starts to pour. Dion stays longer than expected, which annoys Seina. She's left with no choice but to confront him because of too many hours he spent outside her doorstep. However, the moment his blue eyes lay on hers, her cheeks turn bright red. Then she recalls a familiar feature in her mind. She even remembers how her friends describe him having silver hair, a blue-eyed, gorgeous man. She mentions his name, which makes him flinch, Dion Fravel. An important man and the eldest son of the Fravel is the one blocking her way to her house? Might be a coincidence or fate? As thunder rumbles, a mischievous spark ignites in Seina's mind amidst the downpour. An idea takes root, whispering benefits if she can just sway him on her side. With a victorious smirk dancing upon her soaking wet face, she strides forward, ready to play the game of kindness. They're both dripping wet when Seina decides to welcome Dion in her abode. She then offers him a towel and a warm tea. Seina is clearly captured by his undeniable beauty. His beauty can make her tremble. As they savor their tea, Seina's gaze lingers on Dion, pondering why he never graces the novel's illustrations, assuming him as a mere side character. Later on, Dion begins telling his story and reveals that Ellen is his first love. Ellen mentioned that they've only known each other for a month, when in fact, they've known each other since then, but she's erased her memories. Ellen, Euclis, the female lead of the story, is an illegitimate child, so she grew up being bullied her entire life. Due to the pain of her past, she became desperate to forget them. Thus, the decision to seek a witch to erase her memories was made. Unfortunately, one of the memories being erased was when Dion and Ellen first met at the castle. After she ran away, he searched for her everywhere. When he finally found her, she couldn't remember him anymore. This sounds so tragic. However, regardless of being erased from her memories, all he wants is to protect her from a suspicious man that has been eyeing Ellen. The only way he can think of protecting her is to ask for marriage to be able to become close to her, to be able to step up. Not long after, the rain starts to stop and Dion decides to head his way home. Yet in the midst of bidding farewell, he startles Seina by uttering her name, a revelation that sends a shiver down her spine, for she cannot recall ever telling him her name. What a strange man. Next day, Seina is abruptly jolted awake by the noise outside her window. The loud thud against her door only serves to fuel her irritation. She swings open the door, only to be greeted by a child soldier. Flanked by a group of knights and a fancy carriage, their presence casting an aura of intrigue and mystery. With great curiosity, she asks the child the reason for their presence. The child reveals that her master wishes to hire the lady who owns the flower shop, Ellen, as his personal gardener. Suspicion arises from Seina's confusion because why would a noble want to hire a small-town flower shop owner? The possibility of him being the suspicious man Dion mentioned pops to her mind. When Seina decides to go inside, all of a sudden, someone grabs the closing door to interrupt. She begins to startle when the noble proceeds to barge in her house, thinking he might be entering the wrong house. Seina is taken aback to learn that the noble's deal with Ellen fell through, leading him to now desperately seek to buy her house. Her eyes widen in disbelief as she tries to comprehend his sudden proposal. The nobleman introduces himself as Rashad Carlman, the Duke. Seina is still puzzled by his desperation to buy her house. Then an idea comes to her mind that the purchase of her house might be his plan to get close to Ellen. Of course, she doesn't want him to do something shady, so despite him convincing and telling her he will pay generously, she ends up declining the offer. The house was built by her grandpa and filled with memories of her family, so she'll never sell it. Her gesture creates a rage in one of the soldiers, and with a swish of his sword, he tries to attack Seina. But little did he know that she's a hunter, so she threatens to take revenge. Moments later, Dion arrives unexpectedly, which shocks Carlman and Seina. Carlman becomes threatened when Dion reveals how he also wants to buy the house. Tension begins to escalate when both the men exchange prices they are willing to pay for the house as they are having a bidding contest. Two heartthrobs duking it out over a humble house? Talk about drama in real estate! Before it can become a heated argument, Seina cuts them off and makes herself clear that she won't ever sell the house. The Duke fails to convince Seina, so he decides to leave, but swears he would come back another day for the same reason. Dion finds himself alone with Seina, who suddenly succumbs to a splitting headache. Moments later, she collapses to the ground, unconscious, leaving Dion to grapple with the sudden turn of events. Dion decides to call the doctor and learns that Seina is having a cold and she just needs to rest. Seina cannot hide her grin upon hearing herself being called Dion's wife by the doctor. As soon as the doctor leaves, she makes sure to say thanks to Dion. Dion happened to hear the commotion in her house while he was on his way to see Ellen, so he checked and thankfully made Carlman leave. Dion's heartfelt words softened Seina's heart, his sincerity evident in his apologetic expression. He confesses that his offer to buy her house was simply to help her escape Carlman's grasp. Rather than visiting Ellen, Dion opts to care for Seina in her sickness, promising to stay by her side as she rests. Just before she drifts off to sleep, a question nags at her. Did she ever tell Dion her name, since he calls her by it? Dion recalls that Seina did mention her name when they first met, and though skeptical, Seina believes him. However, she clarifies that the suspicious man he mentioned cannot be the Duke, as he has long dark hair unlike the Duke. Talking about the Duke, Seina suddenly remembers how the Duke promised to come back to buy the house, so she immediately thinks of ways to get back to him. She thinks of an idea to punch him, but that will just cause her to be arrested. He bursts out laughing when she thinks of punching the Duke when no one's looking. Seina must be an absolute riot in his eyes. Later that day, Ellen is seen in her flower shop still thinking about the Duke. She's surprised that he's the only man who's ever treated her like that and wants her for her skill, not for her looks. While talking to a mysterious person, she recalls how she declined the offer because she thinks that's too big of a role for her. Her cheeks turn red when the mystery person mentions the possibility of the Duke actually liking her. I wonder who this mystery person is. Seina arrives at Ellen's shop, and Ellen, in a good mood, is what welcomes her sight. So she proceeds to tell her the reason why she's in a good mood and what happened the other day that involves the Duke is the reason. She's happy that someone took interest in her skills rather than her looks. Meanwhile, Seina never expects to get that reaction from her, so she assumes that Ellen might develop feelings for the Duke. In Seina's thoughts, the Duke will come back and looking at Ellen's state. He already seems to have convinced her halfway, so that means Dion won't end up with Ellen and his worries will become reality. So she immediately thinks of a plan on how to make her not fall for his trap. And that is ruining the Duke's image to her. Seina narrates how the Duke barged in and threatened her. She makes sure that Carlman would sound dangerous in her story. She then smirks in success as she sees the evident fear shown in Ellen's face as she tries to ruin the Duke's image and makes him a wicked man. Now her plan goes well when Ellen is completely convinced never to get near him. Dion visits Seina once again and she tells him how she was able to make the Duke look bad to Ellen to help him out. With a firm and jolly voice, she volunteers to help him to get close to Ellen. As Dion extends his hand to gently brush her forehead, Seina's heart skips a beat, caught off guard by his unexpected tenderness. His concern for her well-being sends a warm flush creeping up her cheeks, ignited by the simple touch of his hand and the genuine care in his eyes. She promises to help him out, but as she offers her unwavering support, a shadow of concern crosses Dion's face. His tone tinged with apprehension, he warns her not to get in the Duke's way just to help him. He reaches his hand to touch her forehead and tells her to worry about herself first because she still has a fever. Surprisingly, Dion now decides to let Ellen go, and up until evening, Seina couldn't shrug off the thought of that sudden decision. She is deeply confused because he said he was in love with her his entire life. Dion leaves after saying that, so Seina tries searching for him out in the cold night because she's worried he might get in trouble on his way home. With each step through the darkness, her worry amplifies, fueled by the haunting echoes of loud thuds that reverberate through the darkness of the night. The unsettling sound ignites a flicker of fear within her, as she can't shake the nagging suspicion that someone, perhaps even Dion, is in danger. Curiosity piqued, Seina investigated the source of the commotion, expecting the unexpected. To her astonishment, she discovers Dion as the unexpected tormentor, a revelation that shakes her to the core, unfolding like a dramatic revelation before her eyes. I'm intrigued too. Who knows, Dion might just be the wild card, the unexpected twist waiting to shake up the whole plot. Adding to the mystery, he's flanked by two other mysterious individuals, Turner and a woman in cloak. As they vanish into the night, Seina is left stunned by the unexpected encounter, igniting a curiosity about Dion that she can't shake. Seina still couldn't fully grasp the incident that happened the night ago. The Dion that she saw was completely different from the version of Dion she used to know, who is sweet and caring. What is this? Dion's dual personality? She comes to see Anna to ask if she knows anything about Dion Fravel, the chief's son. As per Anna, Dion is hot, but crazy. Anna reveals the history and background of Dion. She unveils that he is the son of the chief from his first wife. His mother got bullied really hard by the chief's siblings because she wasn't of high status. According to the gossip, she ended up passing away due to mistreatment. Dion must have believed the same, hence his revenge began. Seina Rohill, Chief's younger brother, had his engagement off because Dion stole his fiancée from him. Isabella Fravel, the Chief's younger sister, also got the same heartache when Dion seduced her fiancé in front of her. These are the reasons why he becomes hot and crazy in the eyes of everyone. I never expected Dion to come this far for revenge. The new discoveries once again shock the hell out of her. Anna then warns her to never get involved with him. He is said to be a dangerous person. With an awkward smile, she immediately declines her involvement with Dion, but Anna can see through the lies, so she warns her. Then suddenly, the appearance of the Duke creates murmurs from the crowd. Seina hurriedly covers herself to hide from him, then heads off before he sees her. In the midst of running away, she bumped into one of the hunters, Marcel, who continuously insults her and her father. In return, she insults his stinky breath, and now he's fuming with rage and gets pressed by everything she says. Seina lets out a victorious smile, but this just fueled anger in him, so he's about to punch her when someone grabs his arm. The scene seems straight out of a romantic movie when Carlman proceeds to ask if she's okay. Although she admits to be fine, she is annoyed deep inside that her self-defense plan is ruined. He then recognizes her as the landlord from last time. Their conversation gets interrupted by Marcel's attack, but Carlman is quick enough to fight back in a blank face. Seina begins to panic when Marcel gets out a knife, but with a blink of an eye, Seina kicks the knife from his hand, and with a quick punch from Carlman, Marcel falls to the ground. Officials come right in time and arrest Carlman and Seina. He's just silently sitting at the corner while she stares at him when suddenly he begins to apologize for his behavior the day he barged into her house without consent. Strangely, he's not the kind of noble that would probably rage up and get wild in this kind of situation. Instead, he's so calm. Unlike Marcel, who's acting like a privileged prick. 3 hours later, both of them are still in the prison. She's left with no choice but to convince the guard that she's with a noble, but the guard doesn't believe her at all. Moments later, Marcel's butler arrives to request a settlement with Seina for 1,000,000 rupins. She finds this ridiculous and follows by unraveling the past with an accusation of Seina's father killing Marcel's teacher. Seina's eyes are fueled in anger for this matter. The butler then gives them one condition other than paying money, to let Carlman get beaten up. It's easy for him to say that because he has no idea he's talking about the noble. Not long after, Carlman's aide arrives and sweat begins dripping from the guard and the butler's faces the moment they realize that they are messing up with the Duke. The once boastful butler becomes a cowardly dog. All of them end up discussing the matter. The butler and the guard remain trembling in fear. The sweat keeps on dripping down their faces, and their sense of courage seems lost by the wind. Carlman proposes to visit the injured Marcel, but the butler's demeanor betrays a palpable sense of unease. His nervousness is written across his face, his trembling hands and sweat-drenched brow betraying the fear that they'll be caught red-handed. With a frantic shake of his head, he vehemently opposes the idea. When he's confronted about the said settlement and the beating of the noble, he immediately shakes his head as if denying that he said all of these things. You were so brave a while ago, then now you're like a kid hiding in your mom's clothes? Unbelievable! But then he proceeds to point his finger at Seina, who begins showing a violent reaction because she believes she has no reason to pay for it. Their quarrel is interrupted by Carlman, who volunteers to pay instead. Although it's a big favor for her, Seina disapproves of his decision. He's the last person she needs to be indebted to because she's afraid her house will be at stake, and soon enough he might ask the house as a payback. Seina pushes through to meet the injured Marcel, but the butler makes sure he's stopping her. Unfortunately, he cannot stop her, especially now that she's in anger and deep annoyance. Despite her disapproval of the deal, she fails to stop Carlman in paying the money. She's clearly irritated because she doesn't want to be indebted, especially to Carlman. She already assumes the idea that her house will be at stake. As soon as she arrives at her house together with Carlman, who happens to just walk her home, she firmly mentions her refusal to sell it before he can even say a word. To her surprise, he no longer pushed through the purchase. The money he paid only serves to make up for his actions last time. Next morning, she's awakened by the continuous chatter outside her house. There's a commotion going on, so she immediately gets up to go to Ellen's house and hears everyone talking about how the thief barged in. The moment she gets to the scene, her eyes widen in horror when she spots the blood. Seina heads to Ellen as quickly as she can. Momentarily, someone blocks her, not allowing anyone to come inside. However, she just pushes the person away. Afterward, she glimpses a body on a stretcher covered in a white sheet being transported by the guards. She desperately hopes it's not Ellen. Without any hesitation, she takes the sheet off. Fortunately, it's just a man covered in bruises who doesn't have any serious injuries. Phew! I forgot to breathe for a second. Over a cup of tea, Ellen merely laughs at Seina because she seems to be so worried about her. Indeed, she is worried since she was told earlier that a thief had broken into her place. Her worry increased tenfold when she saw someone coming out on a stretcher. Thankfully, she is completely well. By the way, the man who was carried out on the stretcher was one of the police officers. He hurt himself by slipping on the floor, so he's quite embarrassed about it, which explains the white sheet. LOL. On the other hand, the thief managed to escape through the window before the police arrived. Ellen assumes that they must have left after realizing that there was nothing to steal at her place. It's fortunate that she awoke and managed to call the police quickly because if the thief had come into her room while she was sleeping, things would have gotten dangerous. With that, Seina couldn't help but wonder if the thief situation was supposed to be an event within the story. Ellen is well aware that her place isn't the safest neighborhood around. It's quite shady, which means that more incidents are bound to happen. In the end, she's just glad that Seina is with her. Oh, they're so cute! She's surrounded by kind people, which is the greatest blessing for her. Shortly after, Seina excuses herself and proceeds to head off because of an urgent matter. Without further delay, she quickly attempts to ascertain someone who was definitely watching Ellen just now. With that, she heads to every corner and eventually finds someone running away. As soon as she catches the man, he immediately surrenders as he tries to introduce himself as Aaron. He seems confident that they know each other, even though they just met the day before. Upon Seina's recognition, she recalls his role as the Duke's aide. Once they are settled, Seina finds out that the Duke ended up buying the house behind Ellen's. In addition, Aaron explains and defends himself that he's not a stalker or a thief. The poor man could hardly jog for 10 seconds straight. Well, the truth is that they were the ones who chased out the thief, That's why they ran away before the police arrived. Aaron explains that they were fortunate to notice the incident right away since they've been keeping an eye out. His last words make Seina suspicious because it seems like stalker behavior. OMG, that's like major stalker vibes. He then quickly reclaims his statement as he stutters while explaining that the Duke is not that kind of person. Moreover, Ellen is a very important person to him, so he was simply trying to protect her from nearby. Unfortunately, they don't have a full view of Ellen's house from Duke Carlman's place. That's why it took some time before they realized a thief had broken in. However, if they lived right next door, insinuating Seina's house, they would have been able to stop the thief. But before Aaron can say more, she firmly states that she will never sell her house. With everything clarified, she promptly takes her leave. Upon arriving home, a sense of unease lingers from the recent occurrences, particularly Aaron's suspiciously frequent stuttering during explanations. With this in mind, she decides to glance out her window to check on their house and notices that the lights are still on. Her suspicion of the Duke then continues to grow more. Momentarily, she hears a noise nearby which sounds like the Duke. In spite of everything, she can't just ignore her cellmate who paid off her settlement, so she proceeds to check on him. Surprisingly, his house isn't locked. Now that Seina's inside, she smells a strong scent of flowers. Fortunately, she's able to find the Duke, however, he seems to be losing his mind. Oh my, what's going on with him? After she knocks some sense into him, he quickly scolds her for not informing him ahead that the house is haunted. Soon after, she suggests tracking the source of the sound. Amid his panic, she finds a way to tease him and crack jokes, assuming he's scared of ghosts. Just like a typical man, Duke Carlman refuses to admit his fear of ghosts. In that case, Seina invites him to look for the source of the sound. With that, he follows her with confidence, trying to hide the fact that he's trembling. When she's about to open the room, he asks for some time to prepare first. Fortunately, it's empty, so they're safe. Moving on to the next room, she contemplates whether to stop teasing him and get serious or not. Now that they arrive at the stairs at the basement, Seina takes the lead, going down. She even advises Carlman to stay outside since he seems really scared. However, he insists on coming because it's unsafe for her to go alone. Since it's getting darker as they continue to walk, Seina illuminates the path with a monostone. At the last minute, Carlman thinks of backing out. The noise is gone anyway, so it's fine now. Isn't it totally lame for someone who's known as the fierce monster to get all scaredy cat like that? But oddly enough, he looks adorable. However, she continues to walk, not entertaining him at all. Because of his behavior, he keeps on bothering her. Now that she's starting to get annoyed, she explains that the thing down in the basement isn't a ghost, but most likely a fiend. Finally, they reach the basement. With a sudden gust of wind, Carlman immediately grabs Seina, causing her to fall down and the monostone to roll off. Even though his motive is to protect her, she ends up being more pissed. Shortly after, she gets up and starts looking for the monostone. Upon locating it, she discovers Ellen sitting beside it wearing a disturbing expression. OMG, her face totally freaked me out! Although it does kind of look like Ellen, it's not her at all. Seina isn't bothered about it. Meanwhile, Carlman has gotten scared again. Momentarily, she orders him to pick up the monostone since she's unable to do it because of her back pain. She just observes him walking nervously towards it. As soon as he grabs it, the fiend shows up and attempts to attack him. As a result, he starts losing his mind. Seina then runs to him and tries to keep him sane. Shortly, she notices the ceiling is about to cave in, so they proceed to head out quickly. Fortunately, they manage to make it out safely. She immediately checks up on Carlman, but he appears to be under the influence of the fiend's power. Quickly, she instructs him to shut his eyes, reassuring him that the illusions he's witnessing aren't real. From this point on, Seina will take charge of the situation, so there's no need for him to be afraid. However, the illusion he's experiencing depicts a scene from his past that's been haunting him. Just in time for Seina's return, he seemed to be slowly coming back to his senses. It's all over now since she has caught the pesky fiend. She then explains that everything he saw earlier was an illusion created by it. The fiend, which is called an avalakos, is usually as small as bugs, but they use their stingers to pierce their victims and peek into their nightmares. Then they project those nightmares out into the real world as an illusion. In addition, while the victim is left in a state of confusion, they absorb their energy. In some cases, they can also eat the victim's body. With this in mind, Seina checks on Carlman to see if his fingers are still intact since the fiend loves eating fingers the most. Luckily, he doesn't have any injuries. It's all thanks to her hunting skills, that's why she was able to defeat it. Since she has pretty good intuition, fiends that attack the mind are her specialty. Shortly after, everything that just happened starts to sink in. Carlman couldn't believe that his nightmares, which had haunted him for years, played out right before his eyes in real life. Seina then expresses her concern for him. Now I'm totally intrigued by his backstory. As they lock eyes, he randomly thinks of how she's actually quite attractive, despite her usual aggressive demeanor. But as soon as he realizes his thoughts, he swiftly dismisses them. OMG, what is this behavior, mister? After being embarrassed by his thoughts about Seina, Carlman suggests going out of the house quickly. She then agrees since the sun is going to be up soon. In the morning, it appears that the residents heard a loud crash. Seina then clarifies that it was simply the result of the old house, with the floor giving way. She reassures him that there's nothing to worry about, as it's not anything serious. Shortly after, Ellen rushes over to her, deeply concerned about her safety. After recounting the events, she proceeds to ask him what brought her to the Duke's residence. Her excuse is that she's helping him move in. I wonder why she's lying. After expressing her relief that she's unharmed, Seina expresses a brief moment of random chills. By the way, Carlman is behind the girls, listening to their conversation. When he and Ellen lock eyes, she excuses herself right away. Momentarily, Aaron rushes over to him, expressing his worry. However, he merely pushes him away, instructing him to examine the fiend and investigate it further. As he is unaware of the situation, Seina proceeds to present the insect on her palm to enlighten him. Additionally, Carlman orders him to call over a doctor. Later, inside the house, he attempts to tend to her injured palm. She, however, finds the atmosphere rather awkward as she takes her hand off of him. She insists on taking care of it herself since a burn like hers is common stuff when working with mana stones. In fact, the stone serves as a tool, enabling even those without mana to harness magic. However, there are rare instances where individuals are incompatible with magic, rendering them unable to utilize mana stones. Seina is actually one of those cases. Moreover, the stone eventually turns black once all of its mana is depleted. But she figured out a way to utilize this trait so that she can make use of the stones as well. Anyway, shifting the focus back to the fiend, its appearance in the capital is highly uncommon. No fiend has breached the barrier in hundreds of years. That's why it's quite unusual. By the way, Seina believes that she's settled her debt to Carlman for helping her out of prison. To be fair, she did save his life. In return, he offers to assist her if she ever needs anything from him. With this in mind, she requests that he share any information he uncovers about the fiend with her. However, he is unable to fulfill that request. He is willing to provide her with anything else except that. Despite her persistence, emphasizing her status as both a hunter and a local resident, he stands firm in his decision. As her patience wears thin, Aaron arrives with a doctor just in time to prevent the situation from escalating further. They can sense the heated tension in the air, yet she reassures them that everything is okay, despite the anger evident on her face. In the end, she resolves to seek information from another source. You go, girl. Prove him wrong. The fact that a fiend appeared in the capital means that there must be something wrong with the barrier. If this news gets out, the entire empire is bound to be in a frenzy. The Duke probably has his reasons for keeping things quiet. Amid her deep thoughts, someone grabs Seina's hand. As soon as she hears the voice, she recognizes Dion. She then starts getting chills, but it's probably because she wasn't expecting to see him. Since that day, she hasn't seen him, and her mind has been occupied with the incidents lately. While holding her wrist, he expresses deep concern for her. Remembering that he's the chief's son, he must have heard something about the fiend. With this in mind, she asks if he's free at the moment. Afterward, they are now eating lunch together. He initiates the discussion about the fiend. Promptly, she takes this opportunity to get more information about it from Dion. That reminds him to tell her not to help the Duke from now on. Since her first encounter with him wasn't great, it's best to stay away. Well, that seems quite impossible given that they are neighbors and he has helped her before as well. In addition, he doesn't seem like a bad person at all, since his people even helped Ellen when a thief broke into her house. That revelation leaves him stunned. It appears that he's unaware of Ellen's incident, prompting her to recount the events to him. Moreover, she assures him that there's nothing to worry about. Upon inquiring about his intentions regarding visiting her, he admits that he's still contemplating it. It's evident that reaching out to her is making him anxious. Well, regardless of which version of him is the real one, Seina guesses that Dion's feelings for Ellen remain sincere. Shortly after, he asks her about her plans after lunch. She plans to go to the library to find any information about the fiend. In response, he insists on accompanying her, offering his assistance whenever she needs it. Afterward, they end up coming to the library together, although it wasn't her original plan. However, the idea that Dion might assist her in meeting the mages in the future satisfies her. Next, they each present their IDs to the woman in charge. As she hands him back his ID and welcomes him, she mentions another name, Russell Dorr, leaving Seina with numerous questions. Huh? Is he faking his identity? Now that they're inside the library, Dion casually keeps walking without saying anything. Meanwhile, Seina is dying to ask some questions about his real identity. For a moment, he stops walking, expressing the need to share something with her. In her mind, she wasn't anticipating him revealing his true identity so soon, even though she was curious about it. In the end, she's left dumbfounded as he ends up expressing how much he hates the library. She was expecting something serious, so now she's disappointed. Without realizing it, she inadvertently mentions Russell Dorr. Dion then proceeds to explain that his father made it for him. He opts not to use his real name because he's not officially registered as a hunter, as many are cautious of him due to being the chief's eldest son. In actuality, he doesn't even have any interest in taking over his father's position. Upon mentioning his father, he becomes dejected. Seina then reminds herself to avoid bringing him up as much as possible. Later on, she finds a book about psychic friends. Dion then starts to read it, however, it seems to be a different genre. It turns out to be smut, so now she feels really embarrassed. What a plot twist! He tries to tease her, but she immediately leaves him before he can say more. Once she's far from him, she expresses her frustration. Shortly, she realizes that she brought the book with her, making it seem like she ran away to read it all alone. She's overanalyzing things now. Eventually, she gives up and decides to give it a read. Luckily, she finds the fiend she caught last night. However, it doesn't mention much about it. After finding out that it's not powerful enough to break through the capital's barrier, Seina comes to the conclusion that someone possibly released it inside on purpose. Seina loses track of time, noticing that it's already sunset. She then decides to head back and find Dion. While on her way, she sees a suspicious man with purple hair. She recognizes the same person who came to see Ellen before. It seems like he's headed to a room where all the banned books are kept. She proceeds to follow him in order to find out what he's up to. By the way, magic is prohibited within the library, so if she needs to fight him, she's confident that she'll win. Shortly, the man seems to be coming her way, leaving her no choice but to hide behind a shelf. While hiding, Dion unexpectedly grabs her. Meanwhile, Marquess Euclis shows up and heads to the suspicious man. It appears he's been searching for Ellen all along. That triggers a memory for Seina. In truth, Ellen faced a lot of torment during her time with the Marquess's family. She labeled them all as bad people except for Marquess Euclis, whom she referred to as ambiguous. The member of the Euclis family didn't treat her like a proper human being, given that she was an illegitimate child. However, despite being hated by everyone, Marquess Euclis was the only one who provided her with a room, clothes, food, and maids. Even so, he never once came to see Ellen first. Moreover, even after witnessing how much his wife and children abused her, he never did anything to stop them. But he also never tried to make things worse for her either. He's just as bad, if not worse. Presently, the suspicious man reports that the girl at the flower shop, resembling her, is actually someone else entirely. Given that the Ellen they knew was a very kind and sweet person, the girl they looked into was her complete opposite. He's certain that it wasn't her because of how she aggressively confronted and cursed at their men when they visited her. Marquess Euclis then orders him to stop talking, refusing to hear any further details. Well, to be fair, they're being creepy. Actually, Seina taught Ellen how to curse back then. Learning some swear words is one of the things that will help her survive in this dangerous world. It turns out that she made use of her teaching, which is quite effective. Marquess Euclid believes that she is not the type of person to speak in such a vulgar manner. However, to make sure of it, the suspicious man decides to make another visit. After reporting everything, both of them decided to leave. Once Seina and Dion are alone, he immediately bursts into laughter. Although the situation is quite funny, it's also very effective in keeping Ellen safe. He then continues to laugh really hard, all thanks to her. On a serious note, Ellen's situation is truly scary. However, he seems not to be bothered about it that much. Meanwhile, Seina is ready to attack anyone who tries to hurt her. Momentarily, she catches him staring at her. He expresses that he's having fun being with her, but she doesn't give it much thought. Instead, she proceeds to change the topic, questioning his plans. His reaction to Ellen's situation seems like he doesn't care about her that much. Changing the topic, Dion offers to drop her off at home. His behavior confuses her, not knowing how to interpret it. This guy is giving mixed signals. With that, Seina decides to visit the person who can help her interpret the situation. Anna. As a matter of fact, his behavior shows that he doesn't love Ellen anymore. Rather, he is trying to move on from her. Anna keeps teasing her, assuming that it's about her dating life, but she denies it. Admittedly, she wants to ask about the guys from the detection department. Since she's allowed to go up, she proceeds to go to the office upstairs. Once she's in front of it, she contemplates whether to come in or not. After deciding to come in, it turns out that the door is unlocked. Moreover, a familiar voice starts to speak. It turns out that Dion has been waiting for her. Is it just me, or do you feel the tension too? Seina is shocked to see Dion in the detection department. She's even more confused that he is apparently waiting for her. He reminds her that she told him that she'd be visiting there that day. Indeed, she did say that, however, she didn't imply that he would meet her there. What's even more bizarre, he managed to steal the keys from some poor fellow just so he could wait for her there. Grasping her hand, he happily tells her that the key is a gift to her. They spend their time rummaging through the documents for any information about the fiend. Unfortunately, the search is all for nothing. Frustrated, Seina speculates that the detection department is hiding the research. On another matter, Seina decides to finally confront Dion regarding Ellen. She asks him if he has truly given her up. After a moment, he answers that he did decide to let her go. He claims that Ellen is better off with Duke Carlman. Seina places a comforting hand on his shoulder, telling him not to look so lowly at himself. She swears that he will be the best husband when he finds the girl for him. However, in her mind, Seina is quite apprehensive of her own words. After all, he is a bit of a red flag with his dual personality and kleptomaniac tendencies. Suddenly, Dion grasps her hand, asking her to make him feel better. At first, Seina thinks he wants her to make him laugh again, but what he means is that he wants her to stay with him. Innocently, Seina figures that he wants a friend to hang out with when he's depressed. Somehow I feel like she's wrong, but then again, I can't blame poor Seina since Dion is incredibly confusing. What could his intentions possibly be? He invites her to have lunch with him, but she declines. She has to find a job that day, so she offers that they do it some other day. Dion deflates visibly, making Seina feel guilty. They clean up everything. Unfortunately, just when they're about to leave, they hear footsteps. Dion attempts to approach, but Seina quickly grabs Dion so they can hide. They are standing so close to each other that Dion is blushing like a tomato. When the footsteps fade away, Seina scolds him for trying to reveal that they are there. He innocently reasons that they could have just said that they had business to attend to. Seina sternly tells him that no matter where he goes, he is noticeable. With his silver hair, blue eyes, and his handsome face, everyone is bound to stare. Dion, on the other hand, is quite amused that she finds him handsome to such an extent. He promises to be careful from then on, but he reminds her to keep her promise as well. She did say that she'll make him feel better. Seina swears to do so. However, she did not anticipate that the very next morning, Dion would arrive to take her out. He also does the same thing the day after that, and the day after that as well. She didn't expect their hangout session to be every single day. When he arrives one day to hang out once again, she tells him to wait inside first since she has to clean the house. In an unexpected turn of events, Duke Carlman arrives to her for a favor. It just so happens that it's Dion who opens the door for him. Dion then angrily slams the door in his face. Still, Seina lets the Duke in, much to Dion's chagrin. There's a fiery tension between the two men, and Seina has to intervene when the two begin arguing. The Duke then tells her that since he has to renovate his house, he asks if he could rent out a room in Seina's house. Dion is angered by this even more. However, when the Duke shows her the contract stating that the rent he's willing to pay her per month is more than her yearly salary, she instantly welcomes him to her home. We broke girls can relate. It's an offer of a lifetime. Sorry, Dion, our girl needs to eat. Dion expresses how he hates the idea, even offering to give her the money himself. Seeing how they act around one another, the Duke can't help but ask what their relationship is. When Seina answers that they are just friends, Dion looks devastated. Duke Carlman is amused by how affected Dion is after being referred to only as a friend by Seina. Dion is still despairing in the corner when the Duke stands to leave, giving Seina some time to think about his offer. Seina realizes that Carlman is acting differently compared to when they first met. Why did he suddenly have a change of heart? Seina decides to look over the contract given to her, adding her own terms as she goes. She even asks for Dion's opinion, but her friend still insists on being dramatic. He even emphasizes that his opinion doesn't matter since he's just a friend. He is such a drama king. When he asks her if she's seriously signing the contract, she explains to him that she needs the money. He cited that when the Duke offered to buy the house with a ridiculous amount of money, she did not hesitate to refuse. Seina makes him understand the difference in the circumstances. The Duke is only renting the place, and he did not even demand it of her like last time. Dion then offers to give her money once again. This time, Seina adds that she needs the Duke to protect Ellen. After all, he himself said that Ellen is better off with the Duke. Soon enough, the Duke moves into her house. She reminds him of their terms, insisting that he does not forget a single one. Aaron, who's with the Duke, notices Dion's presence and asks who he is. Teasingly, the Duke tells him that Dion is Seina's friend, just her friend. Dion and Carlman end up arguing once again. Seina has to interfere as usual. She drags Dion to the door, telling him to go home since it's late anyway. However, when she tries to open the door, it's stuck. The only person happy about this is Dion, happily stating that he won't go home after all. Seina and Carlman are even more bothered when they figure out that not only is the door stuck, but even the windows are. It's like they're trapped. Meanwhile, Dion is more than happy to spend the night. Seina realizes that this is once again the work of a fiend. She is shocked to learn that such a creature is hiding in her house, the place she vowed to protect. To the surprise of her companions, she hits the window with all her might. She then points out that the window did not even crack despite the strength she used. The fiend has locked them in to prey on them. Later on, the house becomes unbearably hot. The three of them are sweating due to the excruciating heat. It seems like the fiend likes cooking its prey. It's a rare type of fiend, one similar to the one they encountered in Carlman's house. Angrily, she demands that the Duke tell her the information he's learned about the fiend, but the Duke merely turns away. To cool her anger, Dion offers him a glass of cool water. It turns out that Dion can use magic. He conjures cold water out of thin air and encourages Seina to drink up before it gets warm. Seina then reminds him that they still have to find the fiend. She pulls her hair up in a ponytail, and for some reason, the Duke blushes even more, and it's not from the heat. OMG, he is totally crushing on her so hard. Seina then asks them how they know each other. Carlman tells her that an acquaintance told him to be wary of Dion. This makes Dion smirk cruelly. In Seina's eyes, Dion looks particularly villainous with that expression. As they are going upstairs to look for the fiend, Seina suddenly faints. Dion worriedly fusses over her. Carlman tells him that they have to find the fiend themselves if they want to help her. Even though Seina specifically asks them not to go through the rooms that are locked, they figure that she'll understand since this is an emergency. They enter a room to start their search. As Dion is searching the bookshelves, he comes upon an unknown map. When he turns back, he is shocked to see that Seina is floating. It means that the fiend is swallowing her. They instantly attempt to save her. Carlman manages to cut off the creature's tongue, but it only grows back. Dion uses his magic to harm the fiend, but it manages to evade him. They chase it downstairs where it becomes invisible once again. They end up in the dining area surrounded by the creature's saliva. They're running out of ideas on how to find the creature. Dion accidentally knocks a bag of salt on the floor. They then discover that salt is the creature's weakness since it turns its saliva black when it comes in contact with it. Unfortunately for Carlman, he becomes the bait, lying on the floor covered in salt. When the telltale sign of the creature's footsteps appears, they attack, easily subduing the creature with their combined magic and strength. However, what happened to Seina? Unfortunately for them, the creature begins reviving itself. The only way they can defeat it is by removing its core, a mana stone that powers it. Using his power, Dion immobilizes the creature and opens its mouth widely. He then tells Carlman to go inside the fiend to retrieve Seina. He sure likes using the Duke as bait. The Duke has no choice but to obey since they can't risk Seina getting digested. Unfortunately, the fiend awakens and he ends up getting swallowed violently. Fortunately, the Duke did not get chewed or anything. Thank God. Dion only smirks, noting that he did tell the Duke to hurry. He uses his magic once again to prevent the creature from escaping. Moments later, the creature starts thrashing violently. The Duke manages to escape from its mouth with Seina in hand. He successfully retrieved the creature's mana stone. Soon enough, the fiend disintegrates. Meanwhile, Seina is still unconscious. When they try to wake her, she hugs the Duke tightly, thinking that it's her mom. How comical. Fuming, Dion takes her from the Duke, telling her to hug him instead of some strange weirdo. Later on, Seina wakes on the Duke's estate. Apparently, he brought her to his place due to her state, especially since they were having an in-house doctor in the estate. After a maid clears up her confusion, she takes a well-deserved bath. When she steps out wearing a dress, Carlman and Dion blush like crazy. She tells them how little she remembers of the fiasco earlier. Seina ends up horrified when she is reminded that she hugged the Duke rather tightly. Seina is horrified, apologizing profusely for hugging the Duke so shamelessly. She can't believe she did something so utterly disgusting. She promises not to go near the Duke again. The Duke tells her it's fine. He is even offended that Seina calls the hug utterly disgusting. He tells her that she can still come near him, but Dion interrupts, telling Seina that the Duke will surely forgive her for her mistake. On a serious matter, Seina sternly asks the Duke for information about the fiend. She demands to know, especially since they keep appearing around her house. Carlman tells her that he can't tell her anything since he doesn't know himself. The investigations have not been concluded yet. However, he swears that he will tell her once he knows. He even offers to tell Dion, who yawns at him as a sign of disrespect. Carlman then leaves with Aaron to attend to something. This leaves Seina and Dion alone in the room. He shares that the Duke is probably not telling them anything about the fiend because this situation probably involves some secrets that are too dangerous to know. However, even if that's the case, Seina is still determined to get to the bottom of it. She'll do whatever it takes to protect her home. She emphasizes that fiends are the enemies of hunters. Upon hearing this, Dion's mood suddenly shifts, his aura becoming inexplicably cold. He stands to leave, unwilling to stay for dinner anymore. She watches him walk away, and for some reason, she fears that he'll never visit her home again. Suddenly, he turns back to say that her house has been severely damaged. Meanwhile, Aaron is teasing Carlman about his relationship with Seina. Even the maids are excited to see the Duke acting like this. He's informed that his guests took their leave. He contemplates going after Seina, but stops himself. He recalls how she deemed him being in his arms utterly disgusting, even promising to never come near him again. But then she doesn't seem to mind being around Dion at all. I'm getting so much jealous vibes from you, Mr. Duke. Guys, this is serious. This is more than just a crush. He now realizes that he should have made a better first impression. Turning to his aide, he asks him what kind of things ladies like as gifts. James asks in return if he's going to give it to the lady he's looking for. With this, Carlman suddenly remembers Ellen. He has completely forgotten about her. Nonetheless, he decides that he has to go to her house. However, his aide reminds him that he has a lot of pending work to do. He has no choice but to do it after finishing up his work. He still has to keep an eye out for Ellen after all. When he arrives at Seina's house, the person who opens the door for her is none other than Dion. He even acts as if he owns the place. Seina greets him enthusiastically. She tells him how much of a mess the house is when they arrive. She manages to clean up and replace the minor damages soon enough, though. She then happily shares how she managed to sell the monostone extracted from the fiend. She got a whopping 400,000 rupins for it. She brags that Dion helped her sell it. As usual, Dion looks incredibly smug about it. Seina then asks Dion if he is in any way uncomfortable with his sleeping experience. Carlman is shocked to learn that Dion spent the night at Seina's house. Fortunately, his unsavory speculation is cleared up when Seina shares that she gave Dion another room to stay in for the night. Carlman sheepishly scratches the back of his head, expressing understanding. As usual, Dion takes this opportunity to tease him for his reaction, leaving Seina confused by it all. But she is quite happy that the two are finally getting along. Dion then tells her that he managed to have a good night's sleep. It was exactly what he needed after not getting a wink of sleep in the Duke's house. Carlman recalls how distraught Dion was at his house. He sat by the unconscious Seina all night, looking ready to attack every fiend in existence if given the opportunity. Carlman could hardly believe that this is the same Dion from last night. Contrary to his murderous aura from earlier, Dion looks happy and carefree. Seina, on the other hand, expresses that she was only worrying about Dion's comfort because she had given him a room that had not been used for 10 years. It's her late grandfather's room, but she still cleans it every day. Dion apologizes for causing her any discomfort, but Seina stops him. She tells him that her grandpa would have been fine with it since Dion was a great help to her. Meanwhile, the Duke gloomily watches the two interact. He asks if there's other work to be done in the house. Seina is confused that the Duke would offer to do chores. Dion tells him to cook dinner for them, but Seina objects. She reminds Dion that Carlman is a duke and that they shouldn't ask him to do such things. Dion agrees, stating that nobles probably don't know how to cook. Infuriated, the Duke declares that he'll do it. Brandishing a ladle and a spatula with an apron around his waist, the Duke prepares to cook. Gotta love the determination. The Duke ends up struggling in his first attempt. The two watch him struggle, and Seina thinks that he probably never cooked anything in his life. She decides to step in. At first, Carlman refuses, but when she touches his hand, he ends up giving up with a blush on his face. He is so adorable. His crush on her is so intense. He stares at Seina for a moment, but he offers that they should cook together. Meanwhile, a jealous Dion is in the background, angrily staring at their backs. Turns out, Seina isn't much of a cook either. The Duke stares in horror as she randomly drops ingredients into the pot, even submerging an entire block of butter and adding a bottle of wine. She claims that she's making beef stew. Carlman points out that the beef stew is supposed to be cooked with low fire, but she's cooking it with a strong fire to cook it faster. She hadn't even added the beef yet. The Duke begs her to look for a cookbook and to bring it to him. He chuckles to himself, realizing that Seina isn't as meticulous with the things she's not interested in. Later on, an appetizing pot of beef stew simmers on the stove, all thanks to the Duke. Seina and Dion are quite impressed with him. The Duke brushes their compliments, claiming that he merely followed the recipe. Unfortunately for Dion, he has to try out both beef stews made by Carlman and Seina. Despite his appearance, Seina is very confident with her cooking skills. Seina wants him to judge which stew tastes better. He forces himself to eat Seina's stew, even pretending that it tastes good. Fortunately, they all agree that the Duke's stew is delicious. Seina declares that the Duke is naturally talented in cooking. Dion even asks for another bowl. Carlman is quite happy since it has been some time since he shared a meal with anyone. I love how the three of them are coming together as friends. They all look content with each other's company. Later on, Seina has to run some errands in town, but somehow she ends up bringing the two of them along. Carlman and Dion are like children who went out for the first time, curiously looking around. She tells them to be careful since they can get lost. They really are like little children. Seina is thinking about the things she has to buy, especially a lamp that the fiend has broken. Suddenly, Dion is distracted, pointing at a carved ornament of a dragon. He is so amazed as he listens to the vendor talk about dragons. Dragons are myths, so no one has ever seen them. However, the vendor tells him that they very well could exist. Legend even states that they can use magic too. Dion points out that magic is for demon kind only, but the vendor theorizes that demon kind are actually dragons. So guys, what do you think of this story so far? Please subscribe and turn on notifications for updates on this and all our other stories, so you can be the first to find out when they're out. Thank you so much for your support. See you in the next one!